There it is. Okay, would you just before we get started, check that you're muted? Okay, but of course, just press yourself back in to talk anytime. It's just that we don't need those accidental sounds. I'm afraid I may be the cause of some accidental sounds here today, although it's quiet right now. Somewhere across the street, somebody's building something, and boy, are they making a racket. They quit for the time being, right before our class, fortunately. Okay, I'm in the modules, and I'll go to the bottom here, and I'm going to do module 14, which is today only. Okay, not including Thanksgiving. The least attended class at Saddleback College, the least attendance day in the past, face-to-face classes has always been the day before Thanksgiving. I mean, you could go to your class of 36 and find 2 or 3 people there, and that would be it. So, and we were required to teach that class to the 2 or 3 people. I used to arrange field trips outside of that class time to take care of that, so we didn't have to meet that day. But it was like a ghost town at Saddleback. Then they started getting smart, and they had no classes on the 23rd, or actually not the 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving. But it's back. Okay. Here's our outline. First off, I've indented everything that would be of importance for information for the next 3 tests. And that backs up quite some distance, probably to this one here being the first, the nervous tissue. Histology Studies Guide, which is due. I'm going to have you outline the very short endocrine chapter. I haven't posted that yet. Okay, so these indented things, important. The ones that are not indented can be important to you, but they don't have to be. If you were there, for instance, you don't need the recording. Okay. One of the last lecture topics is the endocrine system. I promised you I'd review the nervous system because that's where the greatest number of mistakes and difficulties are going to be found. But I'm going to take a break from the nervous system today, and I'll get back to it when we come back from Thanksgiving, and I'll review with you. Okay. The endocrine system is something that you should begin to learn over the break that you have here. The whole spiel here is only, I think, 2 pages long. So not hard at all. Wrong date, of course. Okay. Endocrine system. The endocrine system is a system of the body that helps control the development of the entire body. The control of development, the control of movement, that's the nervous system. These 2 systems, the nervous and endocrine systems, are really the controlling systems of the body that tell the other organs what to do. Endocrine glands are ductless glands. ductless means that they secrete directly into the blood that flows into them. The blood flows into all organs. And as it does, it delivers oxygen and picks up CO2, same with nutrients. But with endocrine glands, it picks up hormones that are being produced by the endocrine gland. Once in the circulatory system, the hormone is distributed throughout the entire body equally, with no preference. So any hormone that's picked up by any endocrine gland makes it throughout the entire body. Okay. Doesn't mean that it has function or functionality throughout the entire body, but let's get to that in just a moment. Most people know the word hormone. In fact, everybody knows the word hormone, and almost nobody can tell me what it is. I've had many classes try, and they get closer, some classes anyway, and others stay far away from the actual definition. I'm not going to ask you, I'm just going to go ahead with it. And here's the definition of a hormone. It's longer than you'd like, but it's all parts are necessary. A hormone is a substance that's produced in one part of the body. Of course, if you have two adrenal glands, then you'll have hormones produced by two parts of the body. Okay. So it's a substance produced in a part of the body, and it's transported to other parts of the body by the circulatory system, where it performs a function. Sometimes it performs more than one function. Hormones must act in extremely small quantities to be considered hormones. They cannot be a food, so sugar is not a hormone, for instance, and water is not a hormone, even though it can have tremendous effects. Some characteristics of the various hormones. Well, one, it's obvious, they're secreted by endocrine glands into the blood. They must act in extremely small amounts. Hormones are not food, although they are organic compounds and can be broken down, a small amount of energy extracted from them as food. They do not provide nourishment to the body or to the organs. Hormones do not act on the organ that produces them. If you can imagine the adrenal gland producing adrenaline or norepinephrine to excite the body. Well, if it did, and it got back to the adrenal gland, which it will, and had a function on the adrenal gland, it would be to produce more adrenaline. And that would produce more adrenaline. You would have a building snowball here, and you would be out of control in no time. So a hormone, for some reason, but it's true, does not act on the organ that produces it. And water is not a hormone. The organ that is affected by the hormone is called the target organ. It's not always an organ. Sometimes it's a tissue, okay? But it's still called a target organ. Here's a list of hormones and where they're produced in the body and the target organs that are affected. The master endocrine gland is thought of as the pituitary gland, which we learned about in the section of the sheep brain and the human models. The pituitary gland is considered to be the master endocrine gland because it produces so many hormones. There are two parts to the pituitary. The first part is listed. Whoops, I don't want that whole thing. Here, the neurohypophysis, and then the adenohypophysis. Well, I'm going to skip down to a not very great drawing of the skull. Here's the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland in this side view has two parts, a forward part and a posterior part. The forward part is called the adenohypophysis, also known as the anterior hypophysis. The posterior portion is the posterior hypophysis, also known as the neurohypophysis. Well, this drawing only points out pituitary gland. It doesn't give the two parts, and it doesn't give the four names that I just used. Okay. But here's where we are in our chart right now. So now go back up to the chart. The neurohypophysis is the posterior portion of the dangling pituitary gland. That pituitary gland is situated inside of the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. Okay. It gives it a bit of protection against trauma. You can imagine getting hit hard on the head and squeeze out a drop of hormone. That's a drop too many. There's only 4 drops squeezed out of this and this one, the pituitary, in your entire life, 4 drops. Okay. There's 2 things on this page, neurohypophysis and the forward of it, adenohypophysis. I know we would love to just call it posterior and anterior, but you need to know it by both names. The neurohypophysis is the easier of the two to understand or to remember. Okay. Neuro meaning nerve, of course, and hypophysis meaning the pituitary. The neurohypophysis is composed of nervous tissue. It's the only endocrine gland that's composed of nervous tissue, because I used the word gland in there. And every other gland in the body is composed of glandular epithelium. But the neurohypophysis is an extension downward of the hypothalamus, which is part of the brain. And this is neural tissue producing 2 hormones. The 2 hormones that are produced are here, 1 and 2. See how the chart works. Okay, first part, the name, and now a hormone, and a second, which we'll get to. The first hormone that is produced is antidiuretic hormone, used to be called more frequently vasopressin, still gets called that sometimes. The abbreviation for antidiuretic hormone is ADH. You need to remember or learn the abbreviation when there is one. Most hormones have an abbreviation. Okay. You also need to remember that antidiuretic hormone is also called vasopressin. Otherwise, you'll slip up on a couple of questions on the exam. So keep it in mind that these are the same. But the first name is much more descriptive, antidiuretic hormone. This hormone leaves the pituitary, the neurohypophysis, enters into the bloodstream, and goes throughout the body. But its function is going to be antidiuretic. So the organ that is likely to be affected is going to be the kidney. And the ADH regulates water retention by the kidney. It slows the loss of water by the kidney because it's anti-diuretic. If you were to turn off, or the neurohypothesis was not to make as much of ADH, then you wouldn't get the effects of the ADH, which are to retain water in the kidney. Instead, the kidney would lose water and urination would be uh, more voluminous. One thing that turns off ADH pretty quickly, and remember, in a lifetime, we're talking about 4 drops here of all these hormones that I'm going to list. This is a tremendously small amount. But alcohol turns off the production of ADH right away from the neurohypothesis, with the neurohypothesis not producing as much, at least, ADH, then somebody's going to have to go to the restroom more frequently if they're drinking anything, beer, wine, whatever. The second hormone that is produced by the neurohypothesis is oxytocin. It has various pronunciations, but we don't have an oral exam. Oxytocin is the more accepted one. This is a hormone that's especially active during childbirth, and it promotes uterine contraction and the injection also later of milk during breastfeeding. It acts on smooth muscles. Acts on smooth muscles. The forward portion of the pituitary gland, we could really put a bracket here and say pituitary gland along the side because it's got 2 parts. But the forward part is called the adenohypophysis or anterior pituitary. And it's the one that has the greatest number of hormones extending to the next page. There's roughly 7 that we account for. The first hormone produced by the adenohypophysis is HGH. Sometimes it's called just GH for growth hormone, but it's human growth hormone. In college, we would do experiments with this on, of all things, tadpoles, to see if we could get them to metamorphosize more quickly, and we could. But that was not human growth hormone. We have to reserve HGH for the human being. This hormone regulates growth of the entire body. It's different than our definition. It stretches our definition of a hormone. Our definition said hormones produced in one part of the body and transported to another where it has its function. Well, this HGH is produced in one part of the body, the adenohypophysis, but it spreads throughout the body and has an effect. Here's the difference. Has an effect almost everywhere to regulate our growth so that it's proportionate and we come out hopefully properly proportioned. I don't know how else to say it. A person who is lacking some HGH production during their development ends up with what's called a pituitary dwarf, a small person who might be proportionately proper, but the person is small and unfortunately has a lower lifespan, and senility takes up the last half of that. Okay, so we want this stuff, HGH. We want it throughout our life, even when we're fully grown, and you might think properly proportioned, it is still there. Okay, and if it ever quits, well, then we have all sorts of abnormalities that can occur. One is macromegaly, where the eyes bulge, the bones get thick, all sorts of disorders. Those are in the book if you want to read about it. Again, I keep you away from the disorders uh, until you're really a health professional, I guess. Okay, HGH, human growth hormone. The anterior pituitary also produces prolactin. And this one makes sense. PRL stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk, prolactin. TSH is a very easy one. We'll pass by it real quickly. That stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. This hormone stimulates the thyroid gland to do its job. Okay, so here we have a chain of events. We have the anterior pituitary producing the thyroid stimulating hormone, and it in turn stimulates the thyroid gland to get busy, to wake up. So we need to wait till we get in a moment to the thyroid gland to see what the thyroid is supposed to do when it is awake. Okay, this one probably has the longest name. ACTH, adenocorticotropic hormone. Adeno refers to the adrenal gland. Cortico refers to the cortex of the adrenal gland, the outer portion. Tropic means just simply to have an effect and a hormone. This signals the adrenal cortex to produce steroids. Now, if you're thinking the adrenal gland is there to produce adrenaline, to get you all agitated and get you ready for fight or flight, that's true. But the adrenal cortex produces steroids instead. And these steroids can be such as cortisone to relieve pain, various anti-inflammatories, and aldosterone to help you retain and reabsorb water in the kidney. ACTH does not have anything to do directly with adrenaline. Now, we've lost part of the page, so I want to remind you we're still in adenohypophysis over here, and it produces the follicle stimulating hormone most of us have heard about, FSH. This stimulates the maturation of an ovum in the ovary and the release of that ovum from the follicle. You and I have talked about that, seen it in a model. I think we're going to see it again today. So follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the follicle to mature an ovum and release it. Luteinizing hormone, it does the same thing. Why do we need two? We don't. Why do we have two? Just because. It doesn't mean we have to be limited to one thing that does a certain job. We have two, we just have to accept that. Another hormone, and the last one here in the pituitary, is MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormones. Melanocytes are pigment cells in the skin. And in some people, they develop, and a pigmentation in the skin develops. In some people, they don't develop, and there's lack of pigmentation. But the melanocytes still have to be stimulated, whether they're going to be developing or not. Okay, the lack of pigment is the product of a melanocyte that doesn't produce pigment. Okay, it's still stimulated, but to no avail. On the other hand, other colors of skin, and I'm not talking just about the entire skin color like yellow or black or anything like that. Also, some people have multicolored skin. They have freckles. Okay, and that's all the domain of melanocyte stimulating hormone. The thyroid gland, we're waiting for it to get a stimulation of from the adrenal hypophysis, and the hormone that stimulates it is thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, so when the thyroid receives a burst of thyroid stimulating hormone, it can produce two hormones. One is TH, thyroid hormone. Nothing hard about that. It used to be called thyroxine. I think some books may still call it that, but thyroid hormone is the one I would use. Okay. This increases the basic metabolic rate throughout the body. Thyroxine is a growth hormone. Thyroxine or thyroid hormone is a growth hormone. What was the other one? Human growth hormone produced by the anterior pituitary. I said if there was a deficiency of human growth hormone, you end up with a person who is proportionate but smaller. If there's a deficiency of TH in development, then you end up with a small person, bowed legs, bowed arms, thick legs. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Time Bandits. Interesting movie, but if you get a chance, maybe take a quick look at it. Billy Barty, a name that everybody in my generation knew. It's a no one, not to many of you, but they used to call in those days something that is rather impolite now. I'm going to use the word only because it's historical, and that was a midget. And they used it quite freely, and nobody thought a thing of it. But nowadays people are more sensitive, and probably rightfully so. But I need to make a description here. Calcitonin is the second hormone produced by the thyroid gland. Calcitonin regulates calcium deposition in developing individuals. That means it regulates the formation of bone. The parathyroid glands, there are 4 of them, 2 on each side. They're embedded in the tissue of the thyroid. The parathyroids produce parathyroid hormone. And this also, just bring it down, regulates calcium metabolism in young individuals. We have a tug of war going here. The calcitonin pulls calcium into the formation of bone. The parathyroid hormone pulls it back away from the manufacture of bone, so they keep a happy medium. There's not too much calcium, too calcified to function, and it's not too little calcium either. These two work hand in hand. It's unfortunate that when people had goiters more frequently, I would see a person with the goiter maybe once a week, and it looks like one of those airline headrests. It looks like a small fabric toilet seat you put around your neck, to rest your head while you're in flight. And that's what the goiter looked like. And it was scary to me as a kid. Didn't know what it was. Most people didn't know what it was. The medical profession just cut it out, cut it away. And when they were too aggressive, they would cut away the parathyroids that were inside. And if you cut away the parathyroids and leave the thyroid, you'll get the production of calcitonin, but not of the parathyroid hormone. And so the bone development is no longer normal. And bones get brittle, bones break, roll over in bed, you break ribs, and you die. So they need to find a better way. It was pretty easy using demographics to chart the world. Where were goiters found? Where were they not? They were not found in places where there was a lot of fish consumption. The iodine in the fish stopped the goiters from developing. So the subsidized or added to salt, iodine. We see iodine salt. I still see people buying uniodized salt and wonder why. Well, that's their choice. Okay, we need the extra iron if you don't get it. I said iron. I should have said iodine. Okay, we need the extra iodine. The pancreas. Okay, now the pancreas produces two hormones. Both of these hormones are produced in the islets of Langerhans. The islets produce insulin in the beta cells. No, you can't see that picture here. Okay, as you read through the chapter, which is the next one they're going to be just assigned, you'll be familiar with the beta cells. Alpha cells produce glucagon. These two are in a constant tug of war, these two hormones, to keep the sugar level in the blood from being too high or too low. If the sugar level is too high, we have a real problem. If the sugar level is too low, we have an immediate problem. Okay. For those of you who might be diabetic, I realize I'm talking very simply here compared to what you know and are going through. I had one diabetic girl in class. She's about 21 or 2 or something like that. I don't know. We were climbing in the class Mount Cuamacan in San Diego County. And she kept stopping and measuring her glucose level, blood level, and eat a candy bar, don't eat a candy bar, and had injectables ready if she needed it. She got up to the top of that thing better than anybody. Yeah. But still, what a task to have to go through. Insulin. Everybody's heard of insulin. This stimulates, as a hormone, the absorption of sugar into the tissues from the blood. Okay, so the blood has sugar moving in it. The sugar is a food and energy source for all of the tissues. All of the tissues need some of this sugar. The brain has to have sugar, like it or not. Those commercials that tell you give up all the sugar and everything. I don't know how they intend to feed the brain. They have to do it with something. The brain only can use sugar as an energy source. So all the tissues need sugar. So we need sugar to come into the tissues. If insulin had its way, it would suck all of the sugar out of the blood and into the tissues, leaving nothing in the blood for the brain. And you would be out like a light. Okay. Out like a light. Well, we can't have that much sugar being taken out of the blood. We've got to leave some for the other organs. Glucagon does the opposite. It stimulates the conversion of glycogen to sugar in the liver and the release of sugar into the blood. Okay, so it pulls the sugar out of the tissue and into the blood. What happens if there is no insulin being produced? If we have no insulin being produced, where's the sugar going to go? It'll be going into the tissues because it'll be going into the blood, not into the tissues. Insulin pulls the sugar into the tissues. If you don't have any insulin or you don't have enough insulin, then the tissues give up the sugar to the blood, or the sugar just stays in the blood if it's there to begin with. And that's called hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia. So we have high blood sugar, but what happens to the organs? They're going to starve. And literally, like my cousin, your fingers are taken off, your arms may be taken off, your sight disappears, and you become deaf. And on. Horrible things happen in the sky. Okay. So we want insulin, definitely. Okay. Now, what about glucagon? What if we have an undersecretion of glucagon? An undersecretion of glucagon would mean that insulin takes precedent. And insulin's going to cause the movement of the sugar into the tissue and out of the blood. So an undersecretion of glucagon leads to blood that is low in sugar, and we call that hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia can cause erratic behavior, passing out. Why? Because the blood doesn't have enough sugar to feed the brain. Somewhere in your career, if you're going into any sort of health science, you're going to run into somebody who's acting strange. And yes, they have read. And of course, by reading things, we believe things sometimes. They're going to say, I'm hypoglycemic. I'm hypoglycemic. I've got hypoglycemia. It's not common. Now, they could actually, but the chances of them self-diagnosing is rare. Okay. The adrenal glands produce corticosteroids. Remember the ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, causes the formation of steroids. They're in the cortex, so we can call them corticosteroids. These have several effects. They regulate the blood volume. They reduce inflammation. And they also regulate mineral uptake in the blood. I didn't put on here, but they also do relieve pain, and they help with the reabsorption of water from the kidney. Those two last functions are performed by cortisone and aldosterone. This is in the adrenal cortex. In the adrenal medulla, okay, if it's stimulated, it gives off epinephrine. And this stimulates the sympathetic nervous system for our so-called fight or flight. Medulla here cortex up here. The ovaries produce estrogen. We talked about this the other day, but we'll be talking about a lot of things over and over again between here and the last couple of weeks of the class. And you need to take advantage of that. Ovaries produce estrogen, and if it does produce estrogen, it maintains the reproductive organs and secondary sex characteristics. It works as feedback to the pituitary. Now, what do I mean by that? If the pituitary producing FSH tells the ovaries to mature a follicle, and a follicle is matured and an egg released, and if the egg becomes pregnant or implanted, actually, then you have a feedback of the estrogen to the pituitary to turn off the production of FSH. Job accomplished. We don't need another pregnancy at this time. We've got one going. Okay. Estrogen is feedback to the pituitary. Progesterone is also feedback to the pituitary. Works the same way as estrogen does, and it's produced primarily by the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum. The follicle erupts, the egg is liberated, the follicle becomes the corpus luteum and stays the corpus luteum and produces progesterone so long as the pregnancy continues. If the pregnancy ends for any reason or the child is born, then there's no more need for this, and the progesterone production is ended. The corpus luteum becomes a corpus albicans. The testes produce just testosterone. More and more, I don't know how many commercials are trying to scare the men to buy their product. You got to have more testosterone. You got to have more of this and more of that. Things that nobody worried about before. Well, it does maintain secondary sex characteristics, the deepness of the voice, the beard. Okay. The pineal gland or pineal body produces melatonin. This regulates our circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm means daily cycle, and it prepares the body for sleep. I've never tried this stuff, but people tell me it does work when they get back from a trip and have jet lag and are sleeping at inappropriate times. They take this and they can regulate things. This diagram that we saw just briefly shows the location of the endocrine glands. It shows one that we haven't spoken of yet. We're going to very soon. The thymus right here. Okay. The thymus probably isn't honestly present in a person depicted at this person's age. At this point, post-teen, for instance, that thymus should be fully reabsorbed. It's there to set up the immune response when we're infants. Here's basically at the bottom here what you need to know about this chart that you were just shown. You need to know the names of the endocrine glands. What are their secretions? What's the hormone? You need to know the abbreviation for each hormone if it has one. Most of them do. You need to know the target organ, and you need to know the effect. In other words, it comes down to knowing the entire chart. Okay, but nothing that you're not capable of doing. Okay. Uh, Anybody with a question? Okay, then we'll take a break till 10 after 3. Okay. Tonight or tomorrow, certainly by Thanksgiving, you'll be able to look at our material and see the remaining outlines or material that's going to be due for P4. I'll have all that up even ahead of time if I can. One of the things that's going to be due is not a chapter outline, and that's the histology study guide. So don't forget to work on that one. That one will really actually help you review for the exam. Okay. If you don't see the material or I don't make it clear enough, or God forbid I forget, just send me an email and I'll be sure to get it there for you. Okay. Any questions? Anything? Okay. Coming back here to the 14th week, and let's look down the list. We just talked about the endocrine system, okay, and that is all we're going to talk about it, except as we look at models and they have an endocrine function, we'll repeat it over and over again, okay. I'm going to take a look at this one next for lab, additional models that are going to be for the P4. Some of them actually aren't additional, but they're mixed in with some new ones. The histology photos, that's the link to my website directly to the photos that you can use to learn the organs and tissues. Okay. The practice quiz for the nervous tissue was up a week ago. I brought it down here. You notice it's not indented. Okay, this is not necessarily study material. This is material to practice and see how you're doing. The practice quiz on tissues, I brought it down as well from the previous module. And this one you haven't seen yet is the endocrine system practice quiz. Now, when you open it, you'll probably see that it's worth bonus points. It's not. Okay. Okay, the endocrine system practice quiz is not a bonus test. It was in a previous class, but they didn't have enough bonus point opportunities. Okay, I've pretty much exhausted your bonus point opportunities, except for continuing on with Zoom attendance. Okay, I'm adding them up it looks like I might be short 2 or 3 or something like that. And if I am, I'll put a bonus quiz together for you so that you have that opportunity too. Okay, but this should be taken as a practice quiz on the material we just did today. Indebted histology and endocrine practice. This is another thing I'm going to ask you to turn in. So let's see what it is. Okay. This came about years and years ago when I was called away to a meeting I couldn't get out of right during my class. I knew it was coming up, so I put this together to give them something to do. And I tried to give them a lot to do. So what I would like you to do is to fill this out. Okay. You can print it first for yourself, uh, uh, fill it out, scan it, send it, name the 4 tissue types. Okay, thinking what are the 4? Well, they're nervous, and skeletal, connective, and epithelial. Then it asks you to define these terms. What type of tissue makes up each of these? Okay, and a host of other questions, mostly on histology. And then it switches over to hormone questions. And it asks you about the 12 cranial nerves in order using Roman numerals. Well, none of these questions are cryptic. You'll understand what's being asked. I'm not worried about that. But where do I get rid of that? Here. Right underneath it are all of the answers. So why am I having you turn it in? I want you to write it out. I don't want you to just read it. I want you to actually write it out, and you're done. But you can copy the answers straight, or you can do yourself a favor and try to answer first. You can scribble if you want to scribble out an answer. If you're working by hand, I don't mind. Okay. Here's the answers. The answers are in blue. The answers that I provided are acceptable answers. They're not necessarily the only answers. Now, some people might think, oh, that's just busy work. It's busy work if you let it be, where you just simply plug in the answer using the answer sheet that I've got here. But it's more review work than anything else. Okay, as you put down the answer, you think about it. Here's the practice final exam. This is a final exam I gave some time ago. It has 50 questions, and here are the answers to that exam. Okay, so you can see it's a straightforward multiple choice test. It's a little different though, because you can't click on the answers here. This was in a face-to-face class, not an online class. Okay. I'm not collecting this. This is for you to see what kind of questions I actually ask. I have said it over and over, but I still get asked what kind of questions. And you see they're starting off with cell, and they're starting off with bone, just like the class did. And they're starting off with muscle, okay, and they keep on going. Your test will be different. Your test, however, may have some of these questions word for word mixed up, okay, but you can expect a lot of new questions as well. There are only 50 questions, and because there are 50 questions on a 100-point test, each of these questions is going to be worth 2 points. I feel that you have plenty to study for to have the 2 tests in one day, and I can find out how much you know in 50 questions as I can in 100, I hope. Okay, so uh, okay, I put a due date on there. For that one, due by P4. Okay, now let's back up here underneath where we left off, and we have for 1124 today additional models. So as I said, not all of them are additional. I'm going to be posting more material. I would suggest that by Friday, you might want to take a look and see what I've put up for you. It doesn't mean you have to do it. You don't have to get ahead. But for some of you that do want to keep moving, okay, there'll be material for you. Okay, I know I showed this one, but let's call this review then, if we have to. Okay, this is a mature follicle. It developed from this, and the mature follicle was caused to develop because it was acted upon by FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, which is produced by the adenohypophysis. So now we can add a few extra words that we know. The mature follicle is actually called a Graafian follicle, and it will release an ovum. Okay. If the ovum out in the real world here of the abdominal pelvic cavity gets fertilized and it implants, usually on the uterine wall, then a signal can be sent back up to the pituitary gland to stop the production of FSH. That signal is usually progesterone. Progesterone is produced by these yellowish looking masses. These are the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum, if there is no pregnancy and no implantation, still develops, but quickly senesces and becomes a dead tissue called corpus albicans. Should the pregnancy be successful, then it continues to produce progesterone and keeping FSH from being produced by the pituitary. Eventually, there'll be a termination of the pregnancy, either through childbirth or whatever else. And when that happens, then the corpus luteum, currently functioning, will become a corpus albicans. Bad picture, but it does show a couple of things. This is the kidney in here. Really bad picture. I'd never use it on test. Here's the ureter coming down. There's another ureter coming down this side, and it's coming to the bladder. Lousy picture though. I don't know why I even put it in. Okay, this one I know you haven't. I don't think you've seen it yet. Have I shown it to you? Anybody remember seeing it?
No, we haven't seen it.
No, I haven't.
Okay, that's good. That's what we're here for then, because this is going to be on the test. Okay, but it's not hard. Thank God. We're looking at the front or anterior and posterior of the throat. Okay. Here is the epiglottis. This thing flips down, covers the opening when we're swallowing. The epiglottis is composed of elastic cartilage. Now, everything else that you see here in gray is going to be hyaline cartilage. This is elastic cartilage. Turn it around to the front. Your Adam's apple is known as the thyroid cartilage. It's hyaline cartilage. Immediately under it, the very next piece of cartilage is the cricoid cartilage. The cricoid cartilage is just a band on the front side, but on the posterior, it enlarges. Sort of makes a compartment there to receive the food you're swallowing. C rings are cartilaginous, always. And then on the posterior side, two structures, arytenoid cartilage, both hyaline cartilage. These attach to the vocal cords, and these will move, and as they move apart or together, change the pitch of your voice. The thyroid gland is shown nicely here, at least on half of it. The thyroid gland we just talked about produces thyroid hormone and calcitonin. On the posterior side, these two little dots here and here, those are the parathyroid glands. Now you can see why, in early days of more primitive medicine, people didn't understand how important those were. And if they cut them out to decrease the size of a goiter, it didn't matter to them. It matters to the patient because they'd probably be issued a death sentence right then and there. For reference, this is the spleen. We should know because of the hostra that this is the large intestine. Singular is the hostrum. A band of longitudinal smooth muscle. There are three bands, one here, one attached under here, and one attached on this side here to the mesocolon. The tinea coli are responsible with their unequal contraction for the formation of the hostra. The pancreas is located here. And then, of course, you think pancreas produces insulin and glucagon, and it produces it in the islets of Langerhans. Here's the stomach. This portion of the stomach would be the pylorus. The pyloric sphincter doesn't show, but would be right in this area here. And this would be the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum, going down here. Okay, in the female reproductive system, we would always start with the ovary itself. This is a sex organ, but it also is an endocrine gland, since it produces the progesterone and the estrogen. I didn't mention estrogen on the last slide. As it does, a ovum is released, and that ovum needs to be captured by this structure here. They've got the structure far away right here, but much closer over on this side. This is the os fimbriae, also known as the infundibulum. I'm going to use the term os fimbriae throughout. And what happens is this has cilia that beat inward and has a current set up. When the ovum is released, it is sucked into this structure, the oviduct, from the os fimbriae. Halfway from the oviduct to the uterus, which is here, is where fertilization normally takes place. It can be at other places as well. There is unfortunately a gap, physical gap between the ovary and the os fimbriae. And sometimes an ovum slips out into the abdominal pelvic cavity and is lost, for good. Worse, it's not lost, it's fertilized by a sperm cell that managed to get out there too. And then the two, making a zygote, implant somewhere out in the abdominal pelvic cavity. Could be on the body wall, could be on the intestines, but it has got to be removed. There's no way to, it seems, to carry the developing fetus to term. Okay, the egg fertilized at this point is a zygote, comes in here normally, and this is the uterus. It implants usually in the uterine wall. Coming out of the uterus, this little area here, rather smooth, is made of cartilage. This is the cervix. This is the cervix. And the vagina has ribs or rugae. Now we have a lot of male and female models, so many of them just don't look the same. That's okay. We're going to show them to you. In the male, here's the bladder. Here's the urethra. Urethra passes through this gland here. This is the prostate gland. Another entrance point here into the prostate joins, bringing the seminal fluid. We'll repeat that in a moment. Another version No difference here, nothing really to say. This is called the ovarian ligament. Helps to hold it in place along with the broad ligament that we talked about earlier. But it's not labeled here and you don't need to know it. Okay. Another one that won't take very long, so that's nice once in a while. Here with the kidneys, ureters. Kidney and ureter are both retroperitoneal. The kidney fully retroperitoneal and the ureters about half. This is the adrenal gland on top of it. Okay. We also call it the suprarenal gland, more frequently in the cat. The adrenal gland produces corticosteroids in its outer cortical portion and epinephrine in the adrenal medulla. Same model, but here the ureter is also identified and the bladder. Here's another ureter, better picture than the first one, going up to the kidney. This structure down here would really be trying for some people to get, and then you go, oh, sure, that's the bladder. That's the bladder here and here. It's all folded up. Some cats have a small bladder. Some have one that's not so small. This is what I call the baby model. I don't like it, but it's on every test. It will be on your test on P4. And it'll be pointing right to that structure there. That structure in the throat, this is a endocrine gland, covers the most throat and upper part of the heart. This is the thymus. The thymus. The thymus is needed to set up the immune response. It's also said to mature T cells. T cells you'll learn about in our last lecture on lymph. I'll remind you then. Down a little farther, they show a kidney with the adrenal gland on top of it. Adrenal gland here. That's showing spleen, but that's not part of the endocrine system. And they show the testes down here. And of course, that is part of the endocrine system. The yellow structure on the top of the testes is the epididymis. Spermatozoa are especially spermatids, the first product of spermatogenesis, will be stored in there and given an opportunity time-wise to mature and become spermatozoa. Spermatids first. Don't have a tail. Don't have a neck. Don't have an acrosome. That's the part at the very tip of the spermatozoa, the chemical of which penetrates the membrane of the ovum. The arrow is the spleen, as it says. Here's in here, the diaphragm. You almost want to point to this as the diaphragm like I did, but quickly realize that's liver. This is liver. This is the diaphragm. No, I'm sorry, this is lung. This is lung. It's a good thing you get plenty of time on I hope you feel you get plenty of time on the test that you can go over it again. Not make a stupid mistake like I was making. Okay, so lung, diaphragm, liver, another lobe of the liver, spleen, and attached to the spleen and the stomach and most of the other abdominal uh, organs is the greater omentum. This is the mesentery proper, and it interconnects the parts of the small intestine. Here it's labeled for you. We have many models of the nephron and also of the kidney in general. You might be asked something like this: what is that structure? And given 5 choices, how do you figure that out? Well, you got to find a reference point to get started with, and that's this. This is a glomerulus. You don't see Bowman's capsule around it in this model, but that's the glomerulus. Here's the proximal convoluted tubule, the descending loop of Henle, and then here we have the ascending loop of Henle, and that's what it is. Distal convoluted tubules up here, and the collecting duct is here. You recall these are the arcuate arteries, and this is the cortical radiate artery, also known as the interlobular, but we will use the term cortical radiate. Okay, so here's that cortical radiate, and yes, it can be called interlobular, but not if the test doesn't provide that as an answer. The test is going to provide cortical radiate here. Here's the arcuate renal pyramid, renal medulla is all of this space in here. The renal cortex is all of this space out here. Renal artery, lobar artery, up to the arcuates. For the discharge of the urine from the renal medulla or the renal pyramids, especially the pyramids, first enters into a minor calyx where 2 minor calyces come together, like here. This is a major calyx, where all of the calyces come together to one large final chamber. That's the renal pelvis, and then out to the ureter. Okay, the red arrow didn't get a label here, but that red arrow is the greater omentum again. Greater omentum. This is liver. This is in the right place for a gallbladder, but I would hesitate to call it that at this point. It's probably here, but I'll give you a better picture. I've shown you a better picture of gallbladder already. Okay. This part is obviously liver. Okay. This is the spleen. What is this? Make a guess. The worst that can happen if you're wrong. Okay, then I won't tell you. Here's the gallbladder. Here's the cystic duct, and here's the hepatic duct. Where they come together, it's the common bile duct till it reaches the small little ampulla of Vader. The ampulla of Vader is kept closed or allowed to open by the sphincter of Oddi, which is not labeled. It's very small. Okay, so this section through the skin, we can tell that these are hairs and hair follicles. Okay. But this piece hanging off is a sebaceous gland, an oil gland. It secretes sebum. It's a holocrine gland. And it's also an exocrine gland because it secretes by way of ducts. Here are the sebaceous glands cut. This is a sudoriferous gland. Quite a bit more interesting, actually. It's a merocrine gland. It secretes sweat. It's also an exocrine gland. The small area here that's dark and topped with the pink is the epidermis, stratified squamous epithelium. Below all this pink, until we reach the yellowish green here, all of this is dermis. Dermis is dense, irregular connective tissue. And then we have the hypodermis below, which is not a part of the skin. This shows the pharyngeal tonsil. We also have the palatine tonsil right here. Both the tonsils are lymph nodes. Okay. Lymph nodes are always composed of reticular tissue, a sponge-like tissue with many caverns in it, which can hold many, many white blood cells to fight or combat infection. Here's the epiglottis in the side view. Here's the thyroid cartilage. And the cricoid cartilage is this little spot here, flaring behind to a larger structure. The cricoid cartilage here and here. I'm pretty sure I did show you this one, but it's still one of my favorites. That usually means it's going to show up on a test. Let's follow the lobar artery to the arcuate artery to the cortical radiate, and then we come into the afferent arteriole, which brings blood to the glomerulus. The glomerulus looks like it's in green or gray, surrounded by orangey or green. And this is the glomerulus here, surrounded by Bowman's capsule. Blood that leaves the glomerulus goes out through the efferent arteriole right here, but leaves behind plasma. The plasma enters into the proximal convoluted tubule, then the descending loop Henle, ascending loop Henle, and up to the distal convoluted tubule and out through the collecting duct. The vasa recta is what the efferent arteriole splits into and completely covers the loop Henle and retrieves valuable material, especially water, but also minerals and other nutrients that we don't want to waste and have go down the drain on the collecting duct. This section through the stomach shows the rugae and smooth muscle, shows the pyloric sphincter. The cardiac sphincter is in this area here, but we don't get a head-on view of it. Way up here would be the fundus, from here, straight line down. Fundus, cardia, pylorus, and the pylorus and the cardia together constitute the body of the stomach. This third thing, I'm going to just go over a little portion of it, okay, and then let you go for your holiday. Histology photos. You can find this on my webpage. We went over together all of these pictures here of the epithelial connective muscle. Okay. But I also went over most of these other organs, but these are different slides. And being different slides, it helps to use them. Okay. So this one is a salivary gland. It's got a lot of fat in it. It's got ducts in it. There's a duct. If it's a salivary gland, it's going to have secretory cells. Those are all in, I guess, purple. Those are called acinar cells. Salivary gland is a merocrine gland and produces saliva, the main function of which is lubrication of food. A secondary function these days is the breakdown of starch. It's not as important. Be sure that I want to go fast on this one. I'm sure you can recognize the tongue. The TB will not be in there if it's asked. TB standing for taste bud. Okay. The main tissue, epithelial tissue, is stratified squamous epithelium up here. I've done the esophagus, not going to do that again. Seen this pancreas slide, but bears seeing once again, and we've got some really good ones too. Okay, here's an islet of Langerhans. Here it is magnified. You can see the shape and color and texture even of the cells inside. They're smaller than they are out here. Out here, what we have is acinar cells, pancreatic acinar cells. they produce pancreatic amylase. They're exocrine glands. Inside of the islet of Langerhans, we have alpha and beta cells, and they're part of the endocrine system. Liver slide that I've shown you before looks like a bunch of inverted sand dollars with a central vein in the center. This area is a triad. This area is a triad. There are triads at each corner, whether we can see them or not. We can't see them all. We certainly can see them in the model that I've shown you. This ovary slide, there's an ovum, follicle, a mature follicle at that. Don't need to know the name of this, but it's a primary oocyte, primary oocyte that is going to eventually have its turn and develop into a mature follicle. The testes slide always seems to be the one that gives people trouble. So if I tell you that, it probably won't give you as much trouble. It's a series of tubules, and the tubules are secreting formed elements called spermatids. They're forming the spermatids and releasing them into the lumen. The lumen is light colored here. Okay. These are all interconnected, and the more that form, the more that push, and the more forward these spermatids go until they reach the epididymis, where they can mature. If they aren't utilized, they'll be reabsorbed by the body. Okay, looks like I lost you, and at just the right time. So, can anybody still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, so that was perfect timing. I guess I hit the wrong button. I can bring it back, but what for? Anybody want to ask a question? Okay, now one thing that I am going to be posting for you on Friday, or for Friday, I might do it before that, but I'm going to give you a bunch of PowerPoints to look at, and the PowerPoints are on histology. So that you look at it, you'll be asked to name it or maybe what its function is. Okay, some of them are mediocre, some of them are excellent. Okay, I should just take the mediocre ones away, but the more you see, the better better it works. Okay, so I can't see anybody anymore, so if somebody wants to stay and ask a question, let me know you're here before I cut out. Okay, so there you are. Okay. Okay, so have a good Thanksgiving, if you're into that thing. Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Professor. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie, I have a question.
Yes.
For December 9th, I'm gonna be out of town, so that's why I was like concerned about the test. But I'm gonna be like out of town for that whole weekend. Is there any way I could take the test on Wednesday, the day before?
No, can't take it before, can only take it after.
Okay, so just when I get back.
I don't care if you're out of town. You're not out of touch of a computer, are you?
It depends, like if I can get Wi-Fi or not, but I have no idea.
I will also be out of town, so that was I'm pretty sure I can still take it. I just wanted to make sure, just in case if anything goes wrong. Had that question.
Well, I never give a test early. Can you imagine why?
Yeah.
Not that I don't trust you, but if I give a test early, everybody is
Right.
wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
There's plenty of time to figure this out. Okay. I don't want to make it spur of the moment thing.
Okay.
Make me a suggestion. Well, I'll find out if you're going to have any Wi-Fi at all. You're in a Wi-Fi cave, it sounds like. You know,
Yeah.
like last week.
Yeah, my Chromebook it's either a hit or miss with it.
And Carola, well, you don't have to tell me, but I was going to ask where you're going to be.
I'm going to be in Ireland, so I should have Wi-Fi. I had my friend check, make sure all Canvas and everything works for me. She said it does, so it should be okay.
Okay, so I think you'll be all right.
Okay.
We'll have to figure out the time difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
It'll be 10 p.m. over there.
Well, no, I'm not going to make you take it with your chat lag or anything. So we'll figure it out.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.